Hello and welcome to Wyrd Wessex. I'm Andy.
And I'm Craig.
So what are we talking about today, Craig?
Oh, well, today we're going to tell one of the lesser known stories, that of the Enfield Poltergeist.
Lesser known, really.
Yeah.
Have you been living under a pile of Lego or something? It's probably one of the most documented and talked about poltergeist cases in the world, right?
Well, yeah, all right. So yeah, that about concludes this episode until...
Yep, stay weird. Well, I mean, we're here now. So you've obviously done some kind of research on this, I'm guessing. So, yeah, what have you got for me?
Yeah, you're right. So it is probably the most famous case in the world, but that's precisely why we have to talk about it, right? Like Hollywood and TV documentaries always have their own take, but as weirdos, we're going to go back to the original source, which is Lyon Playfair's book, This House is Haunted. Looks a bit like that if you're watching.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we'll, go into the skepticism, the theories of mass hysteria, and the fact that despite all of the fame, nobody can definitively say what was really going on. Was it a prank, a psychological phenomena, or was it just truly weird? And we can start with the most famous piece of evidence and arguably the best argument for a hoax, that photo of Janet Hodgsons supposedly levitating. Now, she has since admitted to faking some things, but not all of it. And some people argue she's just jumping in the photo, and I would tend to agree with that. But then does one bit of questionable evidence mean we should just disregard everything else? So, yeah, I mean, let's take a look right from the very beginning.
August 31st, 1977, in a London borough called Enfield. Historically, Enfield was an old market town in Middlesex, a county that no longer exists in its historic form. It was a rural area on the northern edge of London. But in 1965, Enfield was amalgamated with the former boroughs of Southgate and Edmonton to form the London borough of Enfield. 1977 was a significant year culturally. Elvis had just died, the Queen was celebrating her Silver Jubilee, and in direct contrast, punk rock was exploding with tracks like God Save the Queen and stuff like that. But on top of that, a little over 3 years earlier, a little film you might have heard of called The Exorcist had introduced mainstream audiences to a new level of fear and sort of fascination with the supernatural and occult.
Yeah, and that's a tough one to ignore, the influence of a film like that. People vomiting and passing out in the cinema. It's kind of hard to imagine it not seeping into the mindset of the general populace.
I do that quite a bit, but it's usually due to all the drink I take in with me. When it's like, sort of kids' films, everyone gets very upset.
Andy's there watching Moana. And another! Oh, dear. Where do I get to? I've lost it now. Yeah, that's a tough one to ignore, the influence of a film like that. People vomiting and passing out in the cinema. It's kind of hard to imagine it not seeping into the mindset of the general populace, particularly a teenage girl who's dealing with her parents' separation. And then this new guy comes on the scene who...
Oh, wait. You're jumping ahead a little bit, aren't you?
Yeah, okay. I'll hold back on that for now. But I do wonder if these kind of stories would even exist without all that kind of cultural input, though. It's like the world was primed for it.
Yeah, I'd say so as well. I mean, you've got this incredible sort of cultural melting pot of celebrations and anxiety and sort of people letting loose a little bit as well with everything that's being made. And suddenly, the Quiet Family, a suburban home, is like the epicenter of what people thought they understood about fear. So let's get to know them a little.
So the family was the Hodgsons. At the head was Peggy, a single mother. And then you had her 4 children, Margaret, the eldest daughter, and the star of the show, Janet. And then 2 sons, Johnny and Billy. So on the night of August 31st, 1977, at about 9:30, 2 of the children, Johnny and Janet, were sitting up in their bedroom. They were settling down for the night, but then they heard it.
It was sort of a shuffling sound. It seemed to be coming from the floor. And it was so odd that even though they'd been a bit mischievous the night before, sort of they liked to play, as any sort of family with lots of siblings knows, you play pranks on each other. But they knew this wasn't a prank. Their mother, Peggy, came in to see what was going on, a little bit cross with all this. But the noise continued, and it sounded to her like someone moving across the floor, sort of shuffling along in slippers. But she knew it wasn't the children. And then the knocking started.
Yeah, 4 loud knocks from the party wall as if someone was trying to get their attention. But that was nothing compared to what happened next. The heavy chest of drawers just inside the bedroom door began to slide across the floor on its own. Peggy froze in fear, pushed it back, and it moved again as if someone was pushing it from the other side. She knew something was truly wrong. So the whole family gathered up sheets and blankets, and they were next door to their neighbours, the Nottinghams.
Vic and Peggy Nottingham, just why not throw another Peggy in there, listened to the story, and at first they didn't believe a word of it. Vic was this tough old sort of builder type. He decided to go over and check the house for himself with his son Gary. No one was in the house, but then, as Vic and Gary were looking around, the knocking started up again. This time it was on the outside wall, and it seemed to follow Vic around the house as he went. And it's safe to say at that point they all of a sudden became believers, as you would. And that's when the police were finally called. Maybe they thought it was a case of frogging.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird, isn't it? Like, they call the police and soon after the newspaper, The Mirror. But, like, who else would you call?
Yeah, no, I was going to break in song, but the Ghostbusters hadn't actually formed yet, had they? Let alone, met up with Slimer and met the, sort of Marshmallow Man and everything. So, yeah, no luck there.
No, it'd be a good 7 years, like, to go by before, we could call the Ghostbusters. But what else is weird about that? Like, the knocking.
What, the knocking on the party wall?
Yeah, you'd think like a simple knock wouldn't be so scary, but there is a historical context to it. While it wasn't an official protocol, knocking on party walls was a widespread practice among neighbours during the Second World War.
What's it like during air raids to check on each other? Like
Yeah,
when
it was
you're hiding
common.
under when you're sort of hiding under your tables and things.
Yeah, apparently it was a common way for people to check in on their neighbours to make sure they were safe, and to provide like a sense of solidarity and reassurance when they were all kind of huddled together. So that kind of familiar sound, that knocking on the party wall, which once meant community and safety, was now a sign of fear. And we will come back to who could be haunting later and why I think these ideas could be connected. But yeah, the police arrive, a constable, Caroline Heaps, and an unnamed male colleague. They're expecting to find a disturbance, maybe a burglar, a domestic dispute, but instead they find 7 people, the Hodgsons and the Nottinghams, all huddled in the living room looking like they'd seen a ghost.
I can just imagine Peggy, sort of the Hodgson, not possibly both of them, in a calm voice that belies her fear, looking at them and saying, I think this house is haunted. And then she explained what had been happening, and the police sort of just listening, completely silent. So to prove a point, Vic turned off the light, and sure enough, 4 loud knocks came from the wall, followed 2 minutes later by the same again, but this time on a different wall. Another thorough search was done of the house, and that turned up nothing as well. The male officer went to inspect the kitchen, plumbing, because, sometimes that can rattle and knock, especially the old stuff. But Caroline returned to the living room, where in front of her and 7 witnesses, a chair came through the kitchen door, sliding across the floor on its own, just as it had with a chest of drawers earlier on that night.
The officers finally left well after midnight, and the family, too scared to go back upstairs, set up camp in the living room. It was a familiar feeling for Peggy, who said it reminded her of her childhood in an air raid shelter.
They must have hoped it was over, that the ghost had got its sort of laughs or scares, whatever it was after, and sort of moved on.
Yeah, they did, but they were wrong. The next morning, they awoke and the phenomena had got worse. Marbles and Lego bricks were flying around the room as if from a catapult, or dropping to the floor as if they'd materialised right through the ceiling.
Blimey. So, from knocking on walls to airborne toys, that's seriously a step up.
It was, and when they turned to the neighbours for help again, along with Peggy's father, who was also now there, things got even weirder. Peggy's dad was in the kitchen when 2 burning hot marbles flew past him.
Sorry.
All right, you get 1 per episode, though.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm probably going to regret it. They'll be fine.
Calling it early.
Yeah, burning hot marbles.
Right. Okay. So Peggy's dad was there as well, and yeah, he was in the kitchen when 2 burning hot marbles flew past him and slammed into the bathroom door. After a few days of this and not knowing what else to do, Peggy did something that seems strange to many critics as she phoned the Daily Mirror.
Why wouldn't you? I guess. Now, well, let's face it. Now they'd be making a TikTok about it straight away. So
Yeah. Some say it was a desperate plea for attention or a cry for fame, but when you put yourself in her shoes, like, what else could she have done? The police had already left. She hoped maybe the newspapers might at least know who to contact. It was kind of the only real option she had left.
And so they sent out a reporter, Douglas Bentz, and a photographer, Graham Morris. They spent all of Sunday evening in the house, and the whole while nothing happened. Until, of course, when they decided to leave at 2:30 a.m. Upon them leaving, sort of almost immediately, Lego starts flying around. Peggy's father manages to rush outside and get the reporter and photographer to come back inside, where the photographer took a Lego brick right to the face, just above his eye. The next day, the senior reporter, George Fallows, was so impressed by what he'd heard that he headed to the house himself, along with his photographer, David Thorpe.
Yeah, that's one that I've been kind of thinking about quite a lot.
Yeah.
Since kind of putting the script together, that idea of this Lego brick. Because, like, if you've got people in a room and someone's trying to be discreet, they might, like, toss a Lego brick discreetly, right? But for it to hit someone with enough force to hurt them, you'd imagine they'd have to be, like, lobbing it, surely. Because they're not particularly heavy things, but I feel like that would be more noticeable. I don't know.
Yeah, like an actual, sort of. And it's interesting as well. I think one of the first episodes we ever did, we mentioned that there was a poltergeist story from sort of over a century ago in Dorset, and that involved stuff levitating and like coming out, and it might have been toys as well. I can't remember. I have to go back and listen, but sort of hitting people. It's definitely a recurring thing, but like with toys. And I remember thinking the same thing. Like that wouldn't normally hurt. It'd have to come with some force,
Which you then think, if you're skeptical and you're in a room full of people, you're going to be like, well, I just saw that girl throw it.
Exactly.
Like, to discreetly do it, she's kind of got to toss it. Unless, well, I don't know. I'm sure we'll come back to ideas maybe as we go along. But yeah, so the senior reporter George Fallows and the photographer David Thorpe go to the house, and they actually find the family at the Burkhams at number 72, having barely slept in 6 nights and bordering on hysteria. Peggy recounted the happenings to Douglas. To which, he says, I'm not an expert, but I think what you have here is a poltergeist, Douglas said. He went on to notice that the oldest daughter, Margaret, was a young teen and might be starting puberty, an idea Peggy didn't even seem to understand. When he asked her, are you looking to move house? She just shook her head. No, this is my home. This is where my family is and where my friends are. Definitely not. Mr. Fallows was convinced, and so he recommended they contact the Society for Psychical Research. But at the sounds of those words, Peggy fainted on the spot.
I mean, sounds like a bit out there and weird, I guess, but why did she faint?
She kind of misheard what they said. She thought they'd said they were going to call a psychiatrist.
Oh, that's kind of sad, really, isn't it? Like, she just spent 6 nights kind of, like, living through the nightmare of this, terrified. And she thinks the only person who believes her is now telling her, well, actually, you're going a bit mad.
Yeah, I mean, again, maybe we should come back to this later. There is like this whole idea. They didn't seem to understand what puberty was. They don't understand like the meanings of certain words. They don't seem to be particularly highly educated, shall we say.
Yeah, they probably just thought going through the change or something like that, or the first change. I don't know. There was just like, I guess some of the terms might not have been widely as used. I don't know. Like, we sort of take it for granted now, but, we all went to school and had like sex education and stuff like that. And,
Yeah. I've forgotten the term. One of the girls does say she doesn't call it a poltergeist. She calls it something else because she mishears it, if you know what I mean. So like,
she calls it a grey.
The shadow man.
Somewhere Paul's ears just perked up.
I can't think what it was now. Oh, she thinks they called it a polka dot, I think. So she consistently through the book says a polka dot.
That makes it seem kind of less scary.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting though. Like, I don't know how educated she actually is, but she does seem to kind of not understand quite a few words here, like psychical, poltergeist, which maybe they are unusual at the time, but she does struggle with things like puberty as well, as I said. So I don't know
Hmm.
whether that, I don't know, it doesn't really add anything to believability or not. It's just an interesting,
Yeah.
seems to be a comprehension issue somewhere in there.
So, yeah, what do they do
Mm.
then?
But they return to the house under Fallow's supervision, but no sooner do they arrive than the knocking starts again, and this time Janet appears to be asleep. So yeah, Mr. Fallow says, I'm going to call the experts right now. You mustn't worry, Mrs. Hodgson. They'll know what to do. And so he went up the road to the call box, dialed the number of the Society for Psychical Research, and spoke to Secretary Eleanor O'Keefe. And he told her about the poltergeist, and she said she had just the man for the job, a new member known as Maurice Grosse.
We know Gross went on to become obsessed with this case, and he had a very personal, very tragic reason for sort of taking it on. Just a year earlier, on the 5th of August 1976, his 22-year-old daughter Janet had been killed in a motorcycle accident. The cause of the crash was never established, but what followed was a series of bizarre and deeply personal coincidences that convinced him that she was trying to communicate from beyond the grave. Before the accident, Gross was at a synagogue service and a special Memorial Day where he was asked to sit in mourning. Uh, just hours before his daughter's death, he was literally in a state of mourning already. There was a birthday card Janet had posted to her brother, which arrived the morning after her death. The card showed a girl with her head swathed in sort of bandages. The punchline was about a lid falling on her head, and Janet had drawn an arrow to the word head and written, and there won't be much of that left soon either. So yeah, oof,
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the picture. It
I
is in the
haven't.
book. I can probably quickly flash it up so that people that are watching can see actually. So there's the illustration.
Oh damn.
And then on the other side is,
Oh wow.
yeah. I mean, maybe it's a weird coincidence, right? But it does get
Yeah.
stranger. Her
Oh
aunt's
really?
pendulum clock, which hadn't worked for a year, began ticking just before Janet's death and stopped at 4:20 a.m., the exact time that she died, 12 hours after the fact. Then there was the rain. It hadn't rained for weeks during the Great Drought of 76, but in his grief, Gross quietly wished for a drop of rain as a sign from her. And he awoke the next morning to find that the kitchen roof beneath her bedroom was soaking wet, but everything else was bone dry. Um, the memorial candles he lit for her funeral kept going out for no reason for the first 3 days, while the ones for the rest of the week burned normally. He saw 8 such coincidences, but he knew there had to be a limit. He couldn't dismiss them as pure chance. He felt that his daughter had not entirely ceased to exist. He had to know the truth, and he had to find proof.
So when George Fellows called the SPR, they weren't just sending out an investigator, they were sending a man with a personal mission, a man who desperately needed to find a ghost for reasons of his own.
And he was immediately convinced that the case was genuine. How could they be faking if they hadn't even heard the word poltergeist before, right? And for a few days, everything was calm, as if the mere presence of Gross had calmed not only the Hodgsons and the neighbours, but also the house itself.
But this wouldn't last. On September the 8th, as Janet slept alone in her room, Johnny had been returned to school, having been sent to a place described as being for problem children. Gross and 3 men from the Mirror were on the landing between the bedrooms. They were startled by a loud crash from Janet's room. It was a chair that had jumped 4 feet forward and overturned, all while Janet was seemingly asleep. Nobody actually saw it, but an hour later it happened again. This time, the photographer, David Thorpe, was ready. He saw it and snapped a photo of it as it landed, swearing that Janet hadn't moved an inch.
Things continued much like this for some time. what we'd call kind of classic poltergeist activity now. It was a constant barrage of the unsettling. Lego and marbles would fly through the air as if they were shot from a catapult. Drawers would open on their own, and doors would slam shut with no one around. And then there were other things too. Cold breezes would sweep through a room and cups would slide across the table with no one touching them. The house itself seemed to have a life of its own, but it was all just a prelude to what was about to happen next. There were moments that were just baffling, like the time Peggy Nottingham's father came by. He walked into a room and saw a chair balancing right on top of a door. He figured Janet was messing around, but the bizarre thing was he couldn't figure out how she'd done it, and when they tried to repeat the trick, it proved almost impossible.
On September the 12th, Grosse was joined by another man, Guy Lyon Playfair, whose book, as Craig mentioned, This House is Haunted, is the main source for this episode. Now, that's a game changer. Playfair was a proper psychical researcher, a well-respected figure in that field. This wasn't just a passion project for him, this was a professional investigation. And with two men documenting everything, the evidence started to pile up. The investigation was about to get a lot more serious.
Piling up like the Lego. No, it certainly did. Guy ended up staying in the spare room, and over the next few nights, he too witnessed the classic phenomena. Chairs would move, and Lego and books would fly as if they were thrown. But they also started to develop a theory about what they were dealing with. Based on the phenomena, Guy and Peggy came to a grim conclusion. They believed it was the ghost of a small child, a girl of about 4, whose father had suffocated her to death before killing himself.
Oof.
I know.
So this girl went dark?
Yeah, the family had somehow acquired some of his furniture, and Peggy quickly disposed of it after the strange goings on, but it didn't seem to have made any difference at all. The spirit had attached itself to the house and to the family.
People started to actually see things now as well, sort of visual manifestations of whatever was going on. The neighbour Vic was actually the first to see something. Returning from his garden shed, he swears he saw a grey-haired old lady at the window of number 284. I've seen the film, that was the nun thing, right?
There's no nuns here, thank you. We'll have none of that.
None of that. Oh dear, oh dear.
Yeah, I mean, we have a 4-year-old and now we have an old lady. But, they seem harmless enough.
Creepy kids, man. Creepy kids. But, maybe. But as the incidents escalate, the activity doesn't match that of a 4-year-old or an old lady. The heavy kitchen table flipped over to lay face down on the tiled floor. Guy made a suggestion to Grosse. They felt that whatever this thing was, they needed to get rid of it. But they also wondered if the constant knocking was more than just a disruption. Perhaps it was some form of communication. They thought that if they could find out what it wanted and what it was trying to say, then it'd finally go away. So moving from just documenting the phenomena, they made the difficult decision to actively intervene. And so they contacted a medium.
And so in comes Annie and George Shaw. They were a couple who insisted on no publicity and no payment for their time, which immediately makes you think they're more genuine, right?
Yeah.
But Annie settles herself into the living room and tells everyone that an entity might come through her and it could be a bit obstreperous. And it was. It was a terrifying spectacle. Annie let out a hideous cry, screaming, "Go away," before cackling like one of the Macbeth witches. George had to use a small mirror, a holy prayer, and a firm voice to try and quiet the entity down.
George insisted, "I've been spat at by better people than you," and then commanded it to look into the mirror. "See what went wrong," Annie, speaking as the entity, moaned. Gozer, help me," and mentioned another entity named Elvie.
Yeah, it's a fascinating detail, that. The name Gozer is actually supposed to be where Dan Aykroyd got the name in the Ghostbusters film.
Damn, I was going to say, that's like, they copied Goat. No, wait, no, it was after that. Damn.
Yeah, apparently that's where... There's a couple of things that are cited as where he might have got it from, but he was into his paranormal stuff and he would have known about this case.
Yeah.
So, seems to be where it come from.
Get him on the podcast.
Well, did you never hear him on Off Menu? It was a nightmare.
I didn't actually.
Basically, he has to do his menu, but they're supposed to obviously have a bit of back and forth. But he pretty much just reads his menu out whilst advertising heavily his Crystal Skull vodka. And honestly, it's the shortest episode they've ever done. I think he got through his menu and then was like, right, thanks, lads. Yeah, I'll see you. Goodbye. Right, don't forget to buy the Crystal Skull vodka. Bye.
You know what? It's Dan Aykroyd. I'd take it. I'd take it.
It was still funny because of how it just happened and he just steamrolled his way through the whole format of the show. But yeah.
And we need Bill Murray.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Where do we get to? Oh yeah. Dan Aykroyd, Ghostbusters.
Yeah, so I mean, according to George, Gozer is a nasty piece of work, a sort of black magic chap. The other one, Elvie, is an elemental, and Gozer is using her. He theorized that if they could remove the elemental, the entire setup would just sort of fall apart. The Shaws also had their own theory about the case, or the cause of the case. They said that the family's Orick Field, oh, that could have been a bad name, was leaking and drawing power from them, making them targets. They believe that there was a very disturbed family condition and a bitter experience in the past that sort of attracted these entities, which, you know.
Yeah, and we do know that's true. Like, Peggy is still bitter about her ex-husband. So yeah, they perform an auric healing, passes over Peggy and Janet, but Janet was resistant.
And after all that drama, the visit seemed to work, at least for a while. The rest of the week was much quieter. Grosse, who was there to observe, was convinced it wasn't acting. He believed what he saw was genuine.
But while things were quiet at home, a different kind of drama was unfolding at school. A meeting was called to address Janet's poor performance, which was mainly put down to a severe lack of sleep. The psychiatrist at the meeting had a very different theory from Grosse and Playfair. They suggested the family needed to get away from the house and, crucially, from the investigators, believing that their presence was only fueling the phenomena.
So the council agreed to send the family away for a week to Clacton-on-Sea on October the 29th, 1977. It was an official week-long holiday away from the house, away from the media, and away from the mediums and investigators, a chance for them to finally get some peace. But before they could go, the activity was back to normal, or rather back to paranormal.
Yeah, I'm going to point out, that's not me there either. That is a direct line from the book.
You know what? Even before I read it, as I was reading that line, I was thinking that's the obvious one to put in, so, you know.
Yeah, it is, but yeah. I mean, one other thing I'll quickly say as well. I find it interesting at the school meeting that Grosse was there as well. Seems a really odd choice to get a paranormal investigator to come in to talk about an unrelated child's schoolwork. But
yeah, can we bring someone else in? Oh yeah, you assume it's going to be like a social worker or something. It's like, who's this? Oh, that's just our paranormal investigator.
Who lives with us mostly.
Yeah, I'm just imagine the school board just like, right, just like noting something down.
Yeah. So anyway, they've returned home, and things come back with a vengeance. Furniture was flung all over the place, beds shook, sheets and blankets were pulled and even ripped off the beds. Knocks and assorted bumps would disturb both the Hodgsons and the Nottinghams next door at all hours, day and night. Things began to happen so fast that they were actually unable to keep the score. They lost count kind of around the 400 mark.
Damn.
Pools of water would randomly appear, and Janet started to see an old man in her room who on one occasion even put his hand over her mouth so she couldn't breathe.
After consulting with a physicist, Grosse and Playfair decided to try and communicate with the thing. With John Burkham as a witness and the family in the bedroom sort of tucked up in bed, Playfair stood on a chair and tapped on the living room ceiling. "Now listen, whoever you are," he said. "I want to talk to you. 1 knock means yes and 2 means no. Do you understand?" Before he could even tap, a single thud came from above his head. He began to tap from below, but the entity immediately started to reply with his own knocks, completely different in sound. Then, as Playfair tried to assert some control, asking, "Don't you realise that you are dead?" the whole situation It's brilliant. That's stoicism. Excuse me, old chap, you're supposed to be dead. But the whole situation just sort of completely erupted at that point.
Yeah, cushion shot across the bedroom. Margaret cried out as she was hit on the head, then again in the eye by a slipper or a cushion. The bed moved up and down, and by the time Guy entered the room to check on the family, it was a wreck. The floor was littered with teddy bears, dolls, blankets that were ripped from the beds. Playfair later counted at least 12 separate incidents in the first minute after the knocking had ceased. John Burkham even came to the door asking if Playfair had just walked down the stairs because he'd just seen someone come down.
It was a complete failure. After that, Playfair gave up all hope of getting an intelligent reply. Finally, on October the 29th, the Hodgsons managed to get away to Clacton-on-Sea. But after a relatively peaceful week away, the activity started again pretty much immediately. So this time, it was Maurice Grosse's turn to make contact. He stayed in the bedroom while Guy, Lyon, Playfair lay with his ear pressed to the floor outside to hear the knocks more clearly, see if he could sort of make more sense of them. Grosse began with a simple question. Can you tell me what 5 and 5 are?
Yeah, and they heard 10 clear knocks. So the thing could do sums. It had intelligence. Grosse started a yes-no code, 1 rap for no, 2 for yes, and began to get answers. He asked,
"Did you die in this house?"
and it replied, yes. He asked,
"Will you go away now?"
no. So he asked how many years ago it had lived there, and the entity replied with 53 knocks. He asked if it died that year. Yes. At last, they were getting somewhere. But then Grosse asked the most dangerous question of all.
"Are you having a game with me?"
And that is when all hell broke loose. A cardboard box full of cushions shot off the floor, flew over the bed, and hit Grosse squarely on the forehead. Playfair rushed in to find a stunned Maurice Grosse and a terrified Peggy. Grosse, far from being frightened, was ecstatic. He was laughing, saying, "Did you actually see it? It hit me in the face. That was a very fine demonstration of what you can do." The box had been out of reach of the children, and no one could have thrown it with that kind of force. By this point, the entire family was seeing things, visions of faces in windows, shadowy figures on the stairs, and hearing all kinds of inexplicable noises, from footsteps to soft moans, and even human speech. This was all very intriguing, but useless as any sort of hard evidence. However, on Janet's 12th birthday, November the 10th, 1977, things were about to get a whole lot more dramatic.
Yeah, they certainly did. Grosse arrived at the house to find all the furniture in the living room overturned. 2 knives had sailed out of the kitchen, and a Guinness bottle had hopped off a shelf, witnessed by BBC director Sally Duganis. It's a good name, that, isn't it? Duganis.
It's a good name. I do like that name. It's good.
Don't hear many Duganises these days.
No, it's
the first time
if
I've
you're
ever
a
heard
listener
one,
and a
to be honest.
Duganis, do get in contact. We want to know more.
Yes. And then the most spectacular incident of the case to date took place right in front of Grosse. The heavy green sofa rose about 4 feet in the air, flipped over backwards, and crashed upside down onto the floor with Janet sitting on it.
Woof.
And then,
That sounds painful.
And then things get stranger. Margaret was later on her way to the toilet when she suddenly cried out,
"I can't move. Someone's holding me."
Grosse and Peggy found her on the stairs, balanced on one leg as if frozen. She was so rigid they couldn't move her. Grosse told Playfair the next day that she was defying the laws of gravity.
It was around this time that the poltergeist introduced a whole new trick: direct writing. The family started finding handwritten messages. One said,
"I will stay in this house. Do not read this to anyone else, or I will retaliate."
Another oddly said,
"Can I have a tea bag?"
Mum?
Yeah, I was going to say, right? And then later, a new one appeared after Peggy showed the first to her ex-husband.
"A misunderstanding. Don't do it again. I know who that was."
Yeah, I mean, it is eerie, but the writing on the paper did look suspiciously like Janet's, which raised the possibility of a hoax once more. So was the poltergeist really using direct writing, or was Janet getting so caught up with the events that she started to add to the chaos herself? I mean, even to me, those messages sound very Teenage girly.
Yeah, yeah. Or
Like,
maybe teenage girl of today, but maybe not then. I don't know.
I don't know. Were you a teenage girl in the 70s? Let us know in the comments. The investigators couldn't be sure. What they knew was that a great deal had happened for which she could not have been in any way directly responsible.
On Saturday, November the 26th, Janet was screaming as if possessed. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure terror, and she was so violent that Maurice Grosse could barely hold her down. While writhing on the floor, she whimpered like a little girl, wailing, "Mummy, mummy, mummy." It sounds terrifying for everyone involved, right? They called a doctor, but when he arrived, he seemed completely disinterested. He gave a Valium injection, diagnosed her with schizophrenia, and then left. They all assumed it would put the 12-year-old to sleep, but it didn't.
I think that's quite interesting too, like that very sudden diagnosis of schizophrenia.
Well, quite clearly mad. Have this.
Which shows the time again, right? But even so, it's like, yeah, she's mad, schizophrenia. Here you go, have some Valium. Goodbye. Anyway, 45 minutes later, there was a crash from upstairs, and to everyone's astonishment, they found Janet in a strange, unexplained position on top of the radio set in the corner, with her head flopped forwards. A photographer was there to capture the moment, and this was becoming more than just knocking, it was a physical assault. To the following night, Janet went into another fit. This one lasted for almost 3 hours. She was less violent, but would wander around with her arms outstretched and her eyes tightly shut. When Guy forced her eyes open and shone a torch into it, there was no reaction. And then suddenly she cried out,
"Where's Goba? He'll kill you."
and the name reminded them of the Gozer that the mediums had mentioned, but now a different kind of voice was starting to come through.
And this then went on to lead to some of the most famous pieces of evidence in the case. The investigators were getting incredible photographic proof now. A photographer had a computer-controlled flash gun which allowed him to take these sort of rapid-fire sequences of pictures. In one of them, he captured pillows flying across the room while the girl's hands were all under the bedclothes. The activity was getting worse, but the help they had wasn't working. After being taken to the hospital and given 3 different diagnoses in 3 days, schizophrenia, hysteria, and finally, perfectly normal, Janet was sent home.
That's quite a range.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, so the minute that she got back through the door, she was off into yet another violent trance. At one point, Grosse went downstairs, and when he came back up, Janet had completely disappeared. He heard like a faint sound and found her wedged tightly between the metal mattress support and the floor, face down. And the second he got her back into the bed, she was out again, apparently thrown a distance of 14 feet.
The investigators had tried, well, everything, but the trouble went on and was definitely getting worse. It was this very crucial stage that help arrived from an unexpected direction. The next day, Guy met 2 old friends from Brazil who were just passing through London. A trance medium painter named Luis Gasparetto and Elsie Dubigras, a spiritual healer. Playfair immediately gave them a detailed account of the case and they agreed to come to the house straight away. They arrived to find Janet heavily sedated on the sofa, writhing in this sort of slow-motion version of a fit. Louise began to make passes around her body while Elsie did the same for her mother. Janet made feeble attempts to hit Louise, but it seemed to have no strength, and for the first time in days, she seemed perfectly calm.
Elsie believed Janet was an unconscious medium who required training, and she offered a shocking explanation for the phenomena. That Janet was a cruel woman in the Middle Ages, and the entities were now returning to get revenge. It sounds far-fetched, but when Louise began to speak to Janet in Portuguese, she started to moan "mamãe," just like a Brazilian child. He then commanded the entity to go out, and in a few minutes, Janet was suddenly herself again.
While Janet had only one further brief fit of violent trance, her unconscious mind was still in turmoil. The following morning, while still in a sleepy state, she began to draw at great speed. The first drawing was of a woman with blood pouring out of her throat and the name Watson written on the bottom. Her drawings were all on the same theme of blood, knives, and death. Janet had no memory of creating them. When Peggy saw the drawings, she had the presence of mind to ask her mother if she knew of anyone called Watson.
Yeah, and that was the shocking part. The Watsons were the couple who'd lived in the house before they moved in 12 years earlier. Mr. Watson had died in the house. But when she asked about Mrs. Watson's death, she was told that she'd died of a tumour in her throat. Kind of shocking detail that matched the first of Janet's unconscious drawings, right?
Yeah, again, one of those things that could be a coincidence, but it's also a bit sort of, I mean, that's when things really started to ramp up from an aggressive point of view. The double bed was flipped on its side, the fridge door flew open so violently it dented on the gas cooker, coins would materialise out of nowhere, the toilet would consistently flush just by itself. The girls kept on being flung out of bed, sometimes 10 times in a night, and complaining their beds were being shaken, and the sheets and blankets sort of yanked off of them, and the pillows snatched from under their heads. They also claimed they were being pinched, slapped, or stuck with needles. So they had a name and a motive for the haunting, but the investigators still lacked this definitive proof they needed. So what was the next step?
They decided to cut off the case from the press, but they still welcomed other researchers. So on December 10th, 1977, Grosse and Playfair were joined by two psychologists from the SPR, a Dr. John Beloff and Anita Gregory. The psychologists were understandably a bit suspicious. They saw the girls repeatedly being flung out of bed, but it never seemed to happen when any of the visitors were in the room, which kind of made them wary. They also heard some curious new noises, loud piercing whistling that seemed to imitate the whistling of the neighbour, and mysterious barking. The investigators knew they had to find a way to get hard evidence.
So shortly after midnight, Grosse decided to challenge the poltergeist to speak. He tried to coax it, asking it to say his full name. As soon as he was out of the room, a tape recorder clearly picked up a series of barks, whistles, and an audible "Oh, Maurice, oh." He was ecstatic. He kept going, asking it to say Dr. Beloff and Anita Gregory. The voice that responded was not Janet's. It was a most extraordinary, harsh, and guttural sound. Unquestionably that of an old man. It was loud and deep, nothing a 12-year-old's voice could produce.
And after much coaxing, Grosse asked,
"Can you tell me what your name is?"
And the voice replied,
"Joe."
Then after a bit more prompting, it added,
"Watson."
The ghost of the previous occupant was now speaking directly to them. Playfair took over the interrogation, trying to reason with the spirit, but the voice wasn't having it. When Playfair said,
"Do you know you are dead?"
the voice immediately snarled,
"Shut up."
Later, when Playfair tried to reason with it, the voice simply growled,
"Fuck off."
"Women's knickers!
Arse! Gers! The psychologist left and immediately brought up the possibility of ventriloquism. You can't blame them, but when Playfair got home and played the tapes back, the voice sounded even more eerie. As we said, it was this deep guttural male voice, and it wasn't anything like Janet's or anything she could have made, as we mentioned. But what is truly weird is that Janet never coughed or cleared her throat, even after a long interrogation session, which, assume she would have done if she was sort of putting on these harsh kind of guttural tones.
I asked her just to talk normally.
Yeah, I was going. The psychologist's report concluded the girls were simply playing tricks. What did the investigators do with that information, though?
Well, Grosse and Playfair completely rejected it. They knew what they were dealing with was genuine, and they plunged back into the battle on December 12th. They were determined to learn more about the voice. So they went back to communicating with the entity. At first, the voice would only offer muffled grunts of abuse, repeating the phrase,
"Shit off."
I need to bring that more into use, telling people to shit off.
But yeah, Grosse kept at it, and before long he was getting quite long sentences in reply to his questions. The voice, which had previously identified itself as Joe, now said his name was Bill. It said it was 60 years old and still living in the house, and when Grosse asked why it kept shaking Janet's bed, the voice replied,
"I was sleeping here."
Now, this was an incredible detail. Miss Hodgson had seen fresh indentations on beds that she had neatly made that morning, as if someone invisible had lain on them. And this sleeping seemed to be getting quite aggressive. The bed shaking became so violent that the bed eventually collapsed. The only way to stop it was to sit on the bed and literally hold Janet still. Of course, the voice would never talk when they were this close to her, though. A detail that naturally made the skeptics even more suspicious, this one. But Playfair had a powerful counter-argument. He said he could imitate the voice quite well, but it would give him a painfully sore throat just after a few seconds. He kept saying, how could a 12-year-old girl keep it up for an hour?
I do like the aggressively sleeping expression too. Like, what were you doing? Aggressively sleeping?
When I'm tired, that's what I do. Aggressively sleep.
The investigators decided to test if Janet and the voice could speak at the same time. Classic guttural gear.
Yeah.
So they decided on a sing-along, inviting the voice to join in. Grosse asked what his favourite song was, and the voice promptly replied,
Scarlet Fever.
And the investigators all burst out laughing at the sheer absurdity of it. So they got the girls to sing Daisy, Daisy, with Bill growling along in his powerful bass voice.
Daisy, Daisy.
Sort of like that. And on playback, they noticed that every time Bill joined in, Janet would drop out, not missing a beat. When they asked Janet to interrupt Bill every time he spoke, Bill would stop short. So clearly there was like a direct connection between the two voices.
As the conversation continued, the voice began to speak in a new, almost sad tone. He said his name was
Bill Hobbs.
And he was 72 years old and came from Durrance Park. He was here to see his family, but they were not here now. It was the most vivid impression of a lost and wandering mind. But once again, the spell was broken when the loud voice suddenly became angry, yelling,
You fucking old bitch! Shut up, I want some jazz music!
Bring out the jazz!
And thus...
Is it the spirit of jazz? Yeah, man! My hat's on fire. Why didn't you tell me?
Oh.
Thought that was your look. No, man, it's not my look. If someone's Mighty Boosh, you have no idea what we're talking about.
So Playfair described it as if two people were fighting to use the same telephone, one grabbing the mouthpiece from the other. The girls were exhausted, and when Margaret, now tired, said, Go away, you animal, the voice gave the surprisingly docile reply,
I will now.
But he failed to keep his word, continuing to make noise for another hour. It was one of the most remarkable conversations ever captured on tape, and it raised more questions than it answered.
Yeah, I don't think we could probably get away. If I could get away with inserting the actual clips as we went along, I don't know, I'll probably get flagged up by YouTube if I do that. So what I would suggest people do is, if you haven't heard Janet and the voice, shall we say, you can find it on YouTube. There's loads of clips on there. So if our impressions aren't good enough for y'all...
I think you'll probably find they're remarkably similar.
It's like Bill was in the room. Wait, you be Joe and I'll be Bill.
We'll say that one for after, Wyrd.
So, the Christmas period was marked by some alarming developments. On the morning of December 23rd, the two little goldfish were found dead in their tank. They were well cared for, and Janet was especially fond of them. The voice claimed responsibility at once, saying,
I done that.
And it wasn't the last time that the poltergeist went after Janet. She was sitting by the window in the living room when a curtain suddenly wrapped itself around her neck and seemed to be trying to strangle her. She looked terrified, as you would. But this happened 8 times altogether. It wasn't a one-off.
Yeah, that's... I'd be put out by that. He didn't stop there either. Miss Hodgson also reported seeing Janet's dressing gown and then her sheets and blankets wrap themselves around her while she was in bed. Grosse's tape recorder even picked up the sound of it happening. Eventually, Miss Hodgson lost her temper and exclaimed, "Oh, you bastard! You fucking bastard!" Then she apologised.
That was uncanny. Like she was in the room, that was.
Oh, well, just channeling my inner Miss Hodgson. She then apologised, saying it was for a good cause for some bad language. On the tape, you could hear her say, "Sorry about that. That'll come out on your tape." While her mother was furious, Janet had a chillingly different reaction.
Yes, she did. When the investigators asked her about the attacks, she just said, "Yeah, now it's just getting boring." It was a completely unsettling response, and Playfair himself doubted anyone else could have described what was going on as boring. The Poltergeist celebration of the New Year was anything but festive. It was chaos, with Mrs. Hodgson reporting that the settee jumped up and went over, both armchairs went over, and a Christmas tree lifted up and flew across the room. Books flew everywhere. She described it all with an eerie calm, almost as if it were nothing. But it seems the voice had a new excuse for the behaviour.
It did. When Miss Hodgson asked who it was that was doing this, a voice claiming to be Fred said it wasn't him. It was Tommy, a little 5-year-old boy. The voice also claimed Tommy was the one who disliked the new video equipment. It seemed to have a real problem with the cameras. A voice repeatedly yelled,
Get that shit out of here.
Even though they had never objected to the tape recorders. But the most sinister moment was when the voice, which claimed to be Fred, gave Miss Hodgson a warning.
It's funny, isn't it, that was your impression of Tommy, the 5-year-old boy? Get that shit out of here!
yeah. It's he was a smoker in life, Tommy. Deep husky tones.
Probably up the chimneys,
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, that's right. Just before she finally got to sleep, Fred told her for no apparent reason to get rid of the bag of knives that she had brought into the house. He claimed they were dangerous, adding, "Get them out before Tommy gets hold of them. He can be dangerous with a knife." And on New Year's Day, Mrs. Hodgson heard a noise upstairs, and a while later, Janet came downstairs looking absolutely terrified. She announced that a knife had been following her around, and Mrs. Hodgson went to look and found a knife with a saw blade on the staircase.
Ooh, like a serrated one, yeah? Nasty.
Yeah, I assume they mean like a bread knife, but it says a saw blade. But Janet's version of the story is even more chilling, right?
Yeah, it really is. She said she woke up and was creeping downstairs when the knife suddenly appeared, dancing around on its own. She went back up and it followed her before she finally ran back down to tell her mum. The fear on her face convinced Miss Hodgson it was no trick. A few hours later, the knives came up again in conversation with Margaret.
Yeah, Margaret was at supper, and as she started talking about the first incident, her own knife suddenly vanished into thin air. She was holding a fork in one hand and nothing in the other. They searched the kitchen, but the knife was never found. And to make things even more complicated, the voice began to come from Margaret as well as Janet.
When Playfair and Grosse asked the girls to resist the voices, it didn't work. In fact, the physical activity only increased in both range and frequency, including 10 brand new light bulbs blowing out in the bedroom and a large piece of wallpaper being ripped off the wall. And they began to see more live action as well, didn't they?
They did. Grosse once watched as a pillow under Janet's head began to slide sideways on the mattress as if an invisible hand was pulling it away. This was also when they realised that Margaret's voice was now claiming to be both Fred and Tommy, which was getting kind of confusing.
Yeah, these most sort of unpleasant new developments seem to be centred around Margaret. At 6:30 in the evening, January the 15th, Margaret rushed out of the toilet, screaming. Inside, on the wall, the word shit had been written in it. Oof. Margaret told her mother something had tapped on her shoulder, and when she turned around, it was there.
The very next day, Margaret was ironing when she put the iron down and walked away from the board. Mrs. Hodgson then saw the iron rise into the air and crash to the ground, breaking its handle. Later that same day, Grosse witnessed the words, "I am Fred," spelled out on the back of the bathroom door in strips of insulating tape. Mrs. Hodgson describes the strong impression of there being somebody invisible in the house, and on January 15th, that impression became a reality. As she was carrying a vacuum cleaner upstairs, she saw a sort of apparition of the bottom half of a man's trousers on the stairs. They were dark, navy blue trousers in a style her late father would have worn back in 1945. She got a quick glimpse before it faded completely. She was certain of what she had seen and asked if it was possible to see these kinds of apparitions, not knowing they are quite common.
They managed to get hold of a professional speech therapist to come to the house and listen to the voices. She was clearly impressed by what she had heard. She pointed out that both Janet and Margaret's normal voices were totally appropriate for their ages and showed no signs of the damage you would expect them to have had they been regularly producing these sort of guttural sounds. She said she couldn't even identify the sounds as a voice exactly because it didn't seem to be created by the vocal cords of a human. She told Grosse that the voice remained a mystery to her, even with her 6 years of experience. But the very next day, the therapist telephoned Playfair and told him nervously that she could do nothing more. She was afraid it might put her job at risk, her reputation, I suppose.
After the frustration with the scientists and other spiritualists was brought in, but unlike the others, this one was a real character. His name was Jerry Sherrick, and he was a London taxi driver and a prolific poet. Jerry had a refreshingly no-nonsense approach to the phenomena. On the way there, Jerry told Playfair that he was getting a deranged woman and that there was more than one entity involved. When he arrived, he told the girls they were like radio sets with defective tuners, attracting all the bad spirits subconsciously.
He went into a trance after announcing that his guide was an Indian, I'm assuming Native American in that sort of term, named White Cloud. Jerry sat still for a few moments before letting out this roar that made everyone jump. After that, Jerry spoke in two different voices, a nasty old woman's voice, followed by a Welshman named Mr. Dye. After his brief trance, Jerry produced a string of names, including Lil, Tessie, and Madge. Mrs. Hodgson was plainly impressed as she confirmed that Madge was a nickname from 20 years ago. He went on to get 7 direct hits in a row with names like Alfred and Alice, which were her father and grandmother's names.
Jerry gave each family member some contact healing, and after his visit, the Hodgson family enjoyed a period of almost total peace. But the peace wasn't to last. Margaret had some success in closing the door and her voice stopped altogether, but Janet didn't seem to absorb what Jerry had said, and after a couple of weeks, the haunting started all over again.
Yeah, this is like the witch farm, Hell Fanog, all over again. Rinse and repeat, expert after expert.
Yep.
Anyway, the peace after Jerry Sherrick's visit was, it was quite short-lived, wasn't it?
It was. The haunting returned much as before, with furniture turning over, small objects flying about, and the usual stream of knocks and thuds. But worst of all, appearances of excrement were becoming more frequent. Mrs. Hodgson went in to help her son with his bath, and she recalled in disgust finding something scribbled on the wall behind the taps. It was also floating in the bathwater.
A floater!
This is a very serious case, Andy. Come on.
I apologise.
They were also finding unusually large and foul-smelling puddles on the floor. John Burkham managed to collect some of the liquid in a bottle and have it analysed by a colleague at the hospital where he worked.
And what did this analysis reveal?
Well, the colleague's response was simple and profane. Are you having me on? This is cat's piss.
Ah, fair enough. There was one final medium. Dono Gemelig Mailing, who Craig gave me on purpose. Yeah, Dono Gemelig Mailing, who came to the house the day before.
Easy for you to say.
The day before the Dutch medium Dono arrived, the house was a complete mess. A chest of drawers had turned over at 3 a.m. More excrement had turned up on the floor, and the family had heard knocks, footsteps, and even sounds of someone breathing near them. Miss Hodgson told Playfair she felt the house was haunted by a strange presence, apart from the poltergeist activity that had already spoken of. And it seems that the medium, Dono, had a very different approach to the others.
He did. On their first visit, Dono and his partner Peter just wandered around the house saying very little. Dono even went up the road to buy Janet an ice cream, and when they came back, he just went upstairs alone for a few minutes before they left. Playfair was left with a feeling of an kind of anti-climax, but he was told that Dono would go on an astral body trip back at the hotel to do the real work. On the next visit, Dono told Playfair he had located a 24-year-old woman in the astral sphere. She was very difficult to detect, but she was there and she was trying to get the attention of the neighborhood. Playfair couldn't help but laugh, telling him she's got the attention of half the world.
The most significant impressions, however, were still to come. Earlier at the hotel, Dono had done a psychometry test on a photograph of the Hodgson family. He saw the 24-year-old woman connected with Janet, but not with the others. This was the first of two ways in which she was involved. The second and most shocking came from a conversation with Maurice Grosse. Dono was most insistent about the young woman's age, and at a certain moment, Grosse told them that he had a daughter who had died in 1976. If she were alive, she would have been exactly 24 years old. Peter recalled that in that moment, all of Dono's impressions came together, and he turned to Maurice and said, "Well, that's it. That's your daughter."
The activity did not just stop, it slowly began to taper off over time. The haunting ended as abruptly as it began, but the exact reason for its disappearance remains a mystery. There was no final exorcism or dramatic confrontation. It seems that after a couple of years of relentless activity, the poltergeist just simply went away. The Hodgson family eventually moved out of the house at 284 Green Street, which was then sold and lived in by a new family. They have since reported no paranormal activity at all, lending to the theory that the haunting was somehow tied to the Hodgson family itself. Janet Hodgson, the primary focus of the poltergeist, has since spoken at length about the events. She maintains that everything that happened in the house was real, stating that the Enfield Poltergeist case remains one of the most thoroughly documented and controversial hauntings in British history. Now, I've skipped over loads here, as the story kind of gets repetitive, as we found with the witch farm as well. So many things are thrown and overturned that you'd assume if it was faked, right? Like, surely they'd get found out. Like, if it really was the family or Janet, you'd expect them to even just get bored or lose interest over time and just stop.
Yeah, like, let's see, someone that was connected with it, like, in the years since would have said something, you know?
Yeah. And you'll also notice I haven't mentioned Ed and Lorraine Warren.
I did wonder, because that you know, The Conjuring, you know, sort of, you know, that tells me they're the heroes of it, right? Well,
as part of my research, I did sit through The Conjuring 2.
Oh, well done. Well done. How are you doing? I saw the latest one recently, as I mentioned, on an Afterword, I think, possibly, but I didn't think it was that bad. But
no, but like, well, I don't know. I guess it's Hollywood, but
yeah.
I mean, their involvement in the case was minimal at best. Like in the film, it's all dramatic that they literally saved the day, and there's obviously a big climax at the end with everything kicking off, whereas it just phases out over time.
Yeah.
Like Guy Playfair, the lead investigator and author of the book, doesn't feature them in his account at all, because, as he put it, they were uninvited guests who only turned up once. He claimed that Ed Warren was more interested in making money from the case than investigating it. So, yeah, I mean, what do you reckon of the case, Andy?
I don't know. It could have been, you know, I think it came up quite early on, the fact that Janet was going through puberty. She may have had, I don't want to diagnose, let alone 3 diagnoses, but, you know, I think there's a good chance there was something undiagnosed there, and we've seen this time and time again. Poltergeist connecting to troubled people, and probably it not being a poltergeist at all, but that troubled person. But this particular case, it had so many people involved that seemed quite convinced of it, and recordings and everything, that it was either best case scenario for us at Wyrd Wessex is it was real, poltergeists are real. But...
Or it's the greatest hoax of all time.
The greatest hoax of all time, yeah, which is still pretty interesting in sort of a cultural phenomena sort of way. You know, everything like that's inspired. But on the darker side of it, it could have been a tragic case of a young girl going through problems at a very already troubled time in her life, and then a bunch of fucking chances, including family members, deciding to get rich and famous and have a bit of a moment in the sun off of it, which is I'd like not to think, because that's horrific. What do you reckon?
I mean, I don't think they made any money off of it, really.
No, I guess not. You're right.
And you can find, if you look on YouTube, you can find an interview that the sisters both did fairly recently for the Conjuring film. It's like an extras, but it's on YouTube. And I don't know, she does look a bit disturbed still. Like,
yeah. Were they like, so this film with Ed and Lorraine Warren, and she's like, who? So, I mean, that about wraps it up, unless you got any last final thought on it. Any theories?
Oh, I have thoughts.
Oh, all right, cool. Go on.
So we often talk about hauntings as a one-way street, don't we? Like a residual echo, a psychic imprint left behind, like a faint recording on an old reel-to-reel. The stone tape theory suggests that the very fabric of a place, the bricks, the old wood, might absorb the intense emotions of the past, playing them back under certain conditions. The trauma, the fear, the anger, all stored, then replayed. A simple echo from a bygone era.
Yeah, so
Well,
I mean,
what if it's not so simple? What if that's only half the story? Modern physics, with its complex dance of space-time, hints that time itself might not be linear, forward-marching arrow we perceive. Einstein gave us the idea of a block universe where past, present, and future might, in some profound sense, all exist simultaneously, while science currently offers no mechanism for us to travel through time or even to truly glimpse it. It opens up a conceptual door. What if a haunting isn't what if a haunting isn't just a record from the past, but a momentary connection with it? What if those time slips, those sudden inexplicable visions or sounds from another era aren't just us observing, but are a brief two-way portal? Imagine the old house on Green Street, saturated with the history of its inhabitants, perhaps the overwhelming visceral fear of a blitz, the constant anxiety-inducing knocks of wartime checks on neighbours, leaving an indelible mark. Bill Wilkins, the man who died there in 1963, experienced that terror firsthand. His life, his death, a powerful emotional signature. Then, years later, the Hodgson family, their terror, their disbelief, their attempts to comprehend the unexplainable. Could it be that the intense emotional energy of the living, in their fear and confusion, momentarily connected with that imprint of the past, not just perceiving a playback, but momentarily touching it? And in that fleeting moment, perhaps Bill, in his own time, or in the eternal now of the block universe, experienced a strange whisper, a fleeting vision, a glimpse of the family who would inhabit his home decades later.
Well, that's interesting. So
it's like that chilling thought from the film The Others. Grace and her children believe their house is haunted, terrorized by an unseen presence. But in a stunning twist, we discover they are the ghosts, inadvertently haunting the living family who have moved into their home. Each party is a haunting to the other, locked in a shared tragic loop. If time truly isn't linear, then perhaps we in our present are not merely passive recipients or residual energy. Perhaps our own fears, our own intense curiosity, or even very existence sends out ripples. And just as the past can haunt our present, maybe, just maybe, we too are haunting the past, caught in a reciprocal, never-ending echo across the dimensions of time. The knocks in Enfield, were they just an echo or a desperate communication from one moment in time to another, both sides sensing an unexplainable presence?
Craig?
Yeah.
Are you high?
Do you think I could have said all that if I was high? But no, I'm just saying, like, what if?
Yeah. No, I don't think I can follow that. Follow us on social media at Wyrd Wessex on all your social media pages, apart from Instagram, where it is at Wyrd_Wessex, and our website, wyrdwessex.co.uk. Thank you very much for listening, and hope someone out there mixes everything Craig just said into a song or something. Thank you for listening, and until next time,
stay weird.
And another thing. That was good. I like that. I've got to say, yeah, you don't really believe that stuff, do you?
Nah, they probably made it all up. Sleep deprived mass hallucination, like a group hysteria, follow a tront.
Mad as a 30.
Yeah, or whatever number of witnesses we have.
Yeah, Foley at Enfield.
Stay weird.